Thanks everyone for coming from wherever in the world you have come. I'm Mick Felton. I think it says on my screen. I'm the publisher at Seren, and we've been publishing fiction and poetry and many other sorts of books now for years. In fact, for 40 years. This is our 40th birthday this year. And tonight we're launching Four Dervishes, a debut novel which is causing quite a stir over here. One critic says of Four Dervishes that it's the most remarkable work of fiction to come out of Wales in 1,000 moons. I don't know how many moons have passed actually since we published Lloyd Jones's prize-winning and game-changing novel Mr. Vogel, but publishing Four Dervishes has a similar sort of feel to it. And so we're going to have a little chat, a little interview, a discussion with Hammad. And we're going to start with the question about his grandfather, who's the dedicatee for the book. Tell us something about your grandfather, Hammad.
Thank you very much, Meg. And thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. Really nice to be here. And it's a really nice feeling to be talking about my own book. Yes, my grandfather, to whom I've dedicated the book as well, Nazir Khan Rind, he was my maternal grandfather and really instrumental in the way I love storytelling. He sort of introduced me to this world. He used to tell me bedtime stories, and he was also the person who, the first person to bring me book, to buy me a book. It was a children's magazine. Yeah, he was a very interesting person. He'd been to Mesopotamia, Iraq, and Palestine during the Second World War, although he didn't see any conflict. So yeah, he had a lot of stories to tell. So I owe him quite a lot.
Yeah, you said then that you were pleased to be talking about your own book. I'm sure you talk about many others as well. But I mean, I was saying before we started this how difficult print is, and how pleased I was to get this book from the printers before all the chaos that's going on here at the moment. I mean, how did it feel when you opened the box, as it were?
Yes, it was really exciting, and I'd been waiting for a very long time, for that moment as well. And I don't know. I mean, in a lot of ways, it was really surreal, as well, holding the physical copy of my book. And I think it didn't really sink in, all of it at that time. It was quite overwhelming, and I think it happened over the time I started realizing it fully.
Right. And I am holding a physical copy of the book just to show the people that it does exist.
It does exist, yes.
Yeah, when you first approached Seren and you were talking about Four Dervishes, you were talking about storytelling, which you've mentioned with your grandfather, and you spoke about the dastan, if I pronounce that correctly. For those of us who aren't from the subcontinent, tell us a little bit about the dastan and what that entails.
Yes, dastan literally means story, tale, but in terms of in the context of Persianate culture, by which I mean cultures which have been influenced by the Persian language and culture, especially North Indian subcontinent and Ottoman Empire, Central Asia. Dastan is something which is an ornate form of storytelling, but it's not only limited to to the oral form. These dastans have passed through generations and have been preserved in the written form. One of them, written by a very famous Indian writer who wrote in Persian predominantly, Amir Khusro, Four Dervishes, is the one from which I have borrowed both the name and the setting in a way. and also sort of I've tried to keep the feeling, to preserve that in the book as well, that the oral storytelling aspect of that, I've tried to keep that in the book as well.
Okay, and I mean that for we outsiders, that's a whole interesting thing. I mean, how recent, and it could be many centuries for all I know, how recent is the transition from the oral to the written?
So these dastans, even at that time, were written. So the Dastan by Amir Khusro was written in the 13th century. He wrote it, and some of them, including the very famous Arabian Nights, have been written over centuries. They weren't written in one go or by one author. So they've been compiled and composed by many writers and by in many installments. But the form itself has borrowed a lot from other cultures as well. So the Persian form of Dastan has borrowed from the Sanskrit storytelling tradition as well, and I think they were mostly orally transmitted.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a cross culture thing then, and it's also a cross language thing as well, isn't it? Because I know when the typescript arrived and I passed it on to our typesetter, he blanched slightly because there's a lot of different languages or words from different languages and a lot of different alphabets involved in the book as well. I mean, I know you speak 8 or 9 languages, is it?
Yeah,
I mean,
more or less, yes.
tell us something about how the multilingual of both your own multilingualism and the multilingual culture informed the 4 dervishes.
Yes. So yes, I speak about 8 or 9 languages. I've spent a lot of time, or wasted, in the words of some people, a lot of time in learning languages, and I mean they are part of my lexicon. So when I was writing it, I found it. I was sort of compelled by it was just very. Because these languages were at hand, they were in my access, and I just found it exciting to use them, to experiment with them in my work. Yes, I like them. I'm sorry that it was challenging for the for the printer.
Well, as you know, I mean, typesetting programs aren't necessarily very nimble with certain alphabets, and we did have the time when the Arabic was reading the wrong way on the page, but we overcame it, thank goodness. Language and the unnamed narrator, and he tell us do whether he was unnamed for a reason, is also fascinated by language. And so, I mean, so the question pops into my mind: how much of you is in the narrator, or how much of the narrator can be found in you?
Yes, yes, interesting question. I think there is some part of me in the narrator. I think there's definitely the linguistic part. But yeah, we can't really run away from ourselves. I tried not to make it an autobiographical novel, and some of the things that happen in the novel, because it's magic realism, couldn't have happened to me anyway. But yes, I think in terms of just a storyteller who's observing and telling the stories, or sharing these stories told by 4 dervishes, with some opinions. And he's not completely, like a fly on the wall sort of a person. He has some opinions and observations about these stories as well, and he likes to digress. I think that's me in a way. Right. Yes.
Okay. There's another question to ask there, but I'll save that for towards the end, because it comes towards the end in the book as well. The wordplay in the book, I mean, words are very important, and both for creating a scene, but also for creating an impression. by the speakers of them. I mean, one of the critics I've read says that he recalls James Joyce when he was reading the book because of the wordplay. How deliberate? I mean, I'm sure you're not deliberately trying to be James Joyce. Who would be? But how deliberate is the wordplay? How much of a key to the book is that?
Yes. Yeah, I don't think I was, ticking any boxes when I was doing all these things, experimenting. But definitely there was some deliberation in that as well, because when I was going through the 70th draft and reading the same text, and I realized that something could be said in a more sort of meaningful way or amusing way involving wordplay, I definitely took recourse of that as well. And I mean, it just it just makes it more interesting, and I think it gives it more sort of levels of understanding, if that makes sense as well in a way. So a Persian speaker or an Urdu speaker or a Turkish speaker can read the same novel in many different ways. I mean, it is a subjective thing in the end. Anyway, every reader reads or reads a work in their own way. But I think that linguistic wordplay just gives it another depth or another level.
Some of the writing or the speaking, the stories are told in a very ornate language. Some of them are brutally brutally brief and to the point. I think perhaps you have a short passage that you could read either in one or other of those voices.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much. So this is a passage. This is the 4th chapter, Verdi and Jinns, and it's when our narrator enters the cemetery. The action, if we can call it action, is taking place in a cemetery, which is, just to give you some background, which is the setting that I borrowed from the earlier work by Amir Khusro, because Amir Khusro's work, or Dastan, is also taking place in a cemetery where the narrator chances upon 4 dervishes and listens to their stories. So yeah, so this passage is from when the narrator has just entered the cemetery. Tombstones were fixed in the ground at an almost equal distance, facing in the same direction, as if expecting someone or waiting for the trumpet to blow on the doomsday, which would allow the dead to leave their graves. I've always found the inscription on these tombstones highly inspiring. I can imagine, nay, almost see, the excited look on the face of my reader, imagining me as one of those sick aficionados of the necropolis. Forgive me if I disappoint you, but I merely love peace and solitude, which is sadly only available in cemeteries these days. Brevity or fragility of life is the most common theme of the religious dictums or the poetic verses carved on these epitaphs. For some, life is but a span, for some a dream, a bubble, or a cookie. Hasti apni habab ki si hai. A bubble is our life. Mao hame fauni o baqa bas torost. We are all mortal, only you will remain. Jihan afsanedir, aldanma baki. The world is a fable, O Baki. Do not be deceived. Engor ki har che neest, dar alam hast. As if whatever in this world exists doesn't exist. I realized that it was getting a drop too depressing. I looked round for something more cheerful. Unrequited love and post-mortal affairs also seemed quite popular. Sare qabre javanan lale ruye, dami ke gul rokhon ayan be gul gasht. Tulips grow at the graves of the young when the rose-cheeked visit for a stroll. Die Toten stehen auf, der Tag des Gerichts. Some tombstones had the genealogical trees with branches going all over the place of some noble bones buried under them. One had a daffodil and the Celtic cross of a Welsh wanderer. Some had tulips and turbans signifying them as the shrines of some minor saints. One would assume that these bones, having exhausted their energies during their living days above ground of stretching to reach stars would stop growing after death. However, the presence of some prehistoric and several yards long graves was clearly defying this line of reasoning. Some say martyrs of religious crusades were buried under these monstrous protractions. Others claim that people used to have gigantic measurements in the past.
Right, thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
What is life? It's a question we're all asking ourselves at the moment, isn't it? I think that passage suggests some of the inventiveness which you brought to the book, which it's actually jam-packed with all sorts of inventions and fables and confabulations. And there's a great kind of variety of characters, even within the four storytellers. So we have the gangster at the end, we have Layla and her niece, and there are so many locations in which the action of the stories takes place, modern and ancient. So we have ancient armies, and we also have Jackie Onassis, if I recall correctly. I mean, yeah, it's capacious. I mean, what brought all that about? Why did you need to range so widely to be able to tell the story?
I would say just for the fun of it. I was having fun and visiting all these places and meeting all these people. So why not? And yes, I think it was just exciting to, and also, I mean, these things had been in my head, and I just wanted to bring them out. And let's see how it's worked out.
I mean, the book is very funny, I found, and the language makes you feel that actually it could be all about surfaces, but it isn't. It's about a lot of things, and to take Layla and her knees, for example, and the ordeals that she undergoes. Tell us a bit about that, because there's a lot of issues, social issues, playing around in the book as well, aren't there?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, yeah, there are a lot of universal issues, I would say, that I've tried to discuss in the novel, from a point of view, from a point of reference that I was familiar with. So there are, women's rights issues, and there are religious bigotry, class division, and many other things. The concept of honor, but in terms of women's rights, I have tried to talk about that as well. And this woman Layla, who comes from a very strange sort of background where women are covered. Their whole body is covered except their knees. It's a very outlandish sort of concept, but she tries to run away from it or escape from it by. So she gets married to a book, by the way, and which sounds very outlandish, but it was in fact a custom in some parts of South Asia, although it was. It was mostly marriage to Quran, as it was called. But anyway, so she finds refuge in these Latin names of creatures. So, like, for example, she of creatures of natural, how should I say, of trees, of animals, fauna and flora. Basically, she finds refuge in that, and these outlandish names, these they give her some sort of a magical power in a way. So that's how she deals with that in a way, and then she runs away physically as well from that society.
Well, I mean, there's a there's a new party game for us all. Which book would you like to get married to? I mean, it's that's a very interesting thought. Yeah, Layla's there in one part of the world. In another part of the world, you're in Cardiff. Cardiff crops up a few times, actually. I mean, you're now in Cardiff. What is it about Cardiff that made you think that it should appear in the book? Because it appears in terms of, well, religious bigotry, and I can't recall I was going to, yeah, but certainly in those terms, yeah.
Yes, yes. I might be taken to task for this, but I've used Cardiff in a way as the center of or the world capital of barbers, and it comes up in the context of this society of very macho men who are bearded and hairy. And they want to sort of launch a crusade against this capital barbers. They think that barbers are basically the epitome of evil, and because they deprive men of their virility. And this is from my own personal experience that when I was living near City Road, I used to go there quite often to barbers, various barbers, and I never saw the same barber again. There were so many barbers there on City Road, and still are. There's so many barber shops. It was just fascinating, and from very different backgrounds. And barbers are really interesting in a way, you know, because they're very good with their language, with their words, because they have to be, you know, doing all that, and they're very inventive. So I'm really fascinated by barbers, and so I thought I should talk about Cardiff in that sort of context.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there are quite a lot of barber shops, aren't there, in literature, but also in film. And you know, you could easily set the next Four Dervishes novel in a barber shop, as opposed to a cemetery keeper's hut.
It would be more cheerful, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, Cardiff also gets a more positive bill of health when it's the meeting place, a romantic meeting place, if you like, for a couple of characters earlier in the book.
Yes, yeah. So and those people, one of them is a migrant from the east, and Cardiff is sort of, yes, it is the romantic meeting place of those characters. So yes, I haven't only talked about Cardiff in terms of barbers, but
there are barbers everywhere these days. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about social issues. You approach a lot of them, well, all the social issues, I think, through satire. The book is very funny, as I've said before. Is that a common way to approach subject matter in the cultures that you're from?
Yes, in some way, but I think it's also from the influence of some writers that I really like, both in Urdu, Persian, and also English or European languages. Especially Rabelais, the French writer, who says that laughing is proper to the man and proper to man. If you laugh at something, you know, if you laugh at evil, that's more satisfying in a way. And at least I feel it very satisfying. So yes, and I didn't want to make it preachy. You know, I did want to talk about these issues, but I didn't want to make it didactic or preachy or anything. So satire is, I think, a very effective tool to talk about these things. Making people think, but also make them laugh, I think. So yeah, I quite like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's time for another reading, isn't it? And I've neglected to know whether this is that satire is going to take a part of this reading.
Yes, I hope so. So this one is the third chapter, and it's called Our Lady of the Golden Nose. And this is just before the narrator enters the cemetery. He spots a shrine. I hope you can empathize with the strong misanthropic feelings which had enveloped me completely by this point. Then, As if in a moment of epiphany, I realized how close I was to the central cemetery. I don't know why, but the thought cheered me up tremendously. Perhaps I just wanted to escape the living and take refuge amongst the dead. My nose started itching with excitement as I started walking towards the Neo-Mudechar arches and belfries of the shrine of Our Lady of the Sacred Nose, Pak Nak Khatun in Urdu, situated at the entrance of the cemetery. This once majestic building is still a landmark that can be spotted from far away. It was constructed by one of the illustrious ancestors of the current King Sati VII during the last century in the memory of a foreign saint, Shahnaz of Shahpur, who had chosen our humble land to spend the last years of her life. Connected to two most eminent families of a neighboring land through birth and marriage, she had led the most serene and uneventful life before her husband started suspecting her of being romantically involved with another. He challenged her before the elders of both families, who decided to judge the matter through trials of fire and water. She was given many opportunities to prove her innocence. Sadly, she failed all. She was made to walk on coals. She is said to have cried and writhed with pain, which was enough to prove her guilt. She was asked to speak in her defense. She stubbornly refused to utter a word. The poor judges were left helpless. The toothless elders pronounced their verdict through frightfully shaking beards. The ancient and most just code of Hammurabi was applied to Shahnaz's nose, the sign of honor in many societies, which was amputated by her own husband. She neither uttered a sound of protest nor blinked with pain when the nose was removed from her face, leaving two inhuman gashes in its spot. I'd advise you to take what I'm going to say next with a grain of salt, but legend whisperers claim that since that moment, Shahnaz the Rinometa never once blinked in her life, nor did she ever sleep a wink. A faithful servant quietly brought her to Sakia, where having rented out a little room at the side destined to be her final resting place, the two women decided to spend the rest of their days quietly. Only it wasn't meant to be so. Soon the fame of a noseless lady who'd never shut her lids spread far and wide, and the devoted people of Sakia, who have always been reverent to foreign saints, especially those who can perform miracles, started coming to her door in throngs to seek blessings and make offerings. She would receive everyone with the same blank expression in her eyes, and without uttering a word would cure the chronic and obstinate melodies with miraculous touch. A most astounding miracle was her contributions to the physical aesthetics of her visitors, and many upper crust khanums from Shimron would visit her to have their unwieldy trunks turned into a Roman aquiline or a cute, impish, upturned nose, according to the latest fashion. A handful of jealous plastic surgeons who had the audacity to submit a formal complaint against her in the civil court met with people's ire and women's heels. The king ordered the best goldsmith in the land to fix a golden nose for the Rinometa, but the night before the operation was due, Shahnaz, who had not closed her eyes for more than 4 years, finally shut them tight, never to open them again. The team of surgeons who performed the post-mortem reported that she had overtired herself. She was barely 30 years old. The golden nose was fixed to the corpse's lifeless face, lending its name to the shrine.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to follow that, isn't it? I mean, in many ways, that passage encapsulates much of what the novel's doing. It's funny. It's making social comment, making comment about all sorts of aspects of society, actually, and yeah, it does encapsulate it so much. There is a further aspect of the novel which I think Western readers will find attractive, partly because I think we associate it so much with literature from other cultures and countries, and that's the dreaded magic realism, which you've also employed in the novel. Do you want to tell us something about why you decided to go down the magic realism route?
Yes, sure. Yeah, basically, if you have to tell a story, why not have some jinns in it? I quite like the idea, and I grew up with the stories of jinns and fairies and all kinds of things. And then when I started reading sort of serious literature, I also found the the tradition of magic realism really exciting, whether it's from Latin America or Indian English literature or Günter Grass. I just really like that, and that magical thing makes it more exciting, I think. So yes, that was the the reason.
I think it certainly fits into the language of the book that you've used so successfully. I mean, you talk about growing up with storytelling. You come from a small village in the Punjab, and now you're living in, well, let's not call it a metropolis, but the largest city in the UK, Cardiff. I mean, how's that affected the way that you look at the world and you look at writing?
Yes, in many ways. I mean, it was an interesting journey in some ways as well, because I come from sort of a landed family, and my parents wanted me to study law. They sent me to a bigger city, Lahore, in Punjab, where I studied law, although I spent more time reading French novels in a library. And I found law really boring. And then they sent me to the UK to read more law, to study more law. But I thought it was a great opportunity to study filmmaking. So I studied filmmaking, and then finding it difficult to get a job in that field, I managed to find a job in the financial sector, which brought me to Cardiff. So I ended up here. But yes, so this very not very straight journey has, I'm sure it has influenced me in a lot of ways, more ways than I can understand or realize. But yeah, it's different cultures, because the culture of my village or my little town is very different from Cardiff in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it's the same sort of thing, because we are the same at the end of the day. So all of that has definitely influenced me and my writing.
Right, and Cardiff and Wales, it's liminal, isn't it? There are kind of 2 or 3 conflicting or competing cultures going on, or cultures living together in the same way that perhaps there are in the Punjab. I mean, what's next in terms of your writing? Is it the Punjab, or is it Wales?
Yes. So I feel like I want to join it again, but this time I want to make it more sort of obvious, because for Dervishes is more sort of, it's set in a fictional state between Indian subcontinent and Iran, because for linguistic reasons I wanted to experiment with both Urdu and Persian. I wanted my characters to speak both languages, but the next piece of work that I'm working on is more sort of grounded in reality. It's again, it starts in a cemetery, because I just find them really fascinating, as I said. But it's Katay Cemetery, so it's got a name, and it's about a character of Pakistani Welsh heritage who finds a body in that cemetery, which sets him off on a linguistic and personal journey, basically.
Okay. Finding a body in a cemetery, eh? That's unusual. Okay. Well, we look forward to seeing that in due course when you want to share it with us. Or do you want to give us a final reading, and then we'll perhaps open the mic up to some questions from
yes,
people.
Certainly. I'll keep it short this time. And I talked about spirits. So this is about some spirits. I was wandering like an aimless soul, thinking about the possibility of post-mortal romances, when I heard some voices in the distance. My first reaction, frankly, was one of annoyance about being chased by the living into the city of the silent. After all, I had taken refuge there just to flee from the pestering throngs of humanity, and they were there too. Then I remembered that the local rags had been resonant with the news of spirits seen, or rather sensed, in the words of the third eyewitnesses, around the cemetery in the past few months. Last week, they were showing a reality telly show about vampires infecting their victims with AIDS and other kinds of virusful vermin. I know the skeptic reader of the age of refrigerator and automobile would have trouble believing in the presence of the others, spirits, kind or evil, revenants from the past or visitors from the future, aliens from unidentified flying saucers or Yeti monks from Tibetan heights, blue jinns of the desert or the wish-fulfilling genie of the lamp, Welsh pukas or wailing banshees of the Celts, ghouls or daves with gigantic proportions, churales with their feet turned backwards, one-legged Athenian empusas or three-legged Zoroastrian zebras, imps or chalavas that would jump on your shoulders from trees, trees that weep blood, men with horns, tails and hoofs, shape-shifting hobgoblins or protean baldanders, loony werewolves or hirsute garou, weasels that turn into badgers or cobras that turn into sultry actresses after having lived for hundreds of years, Occitan horses that kidnap urchins, heike crabs containing the gouty spirits of slain samurai, fallen angels dead rising from their graves, dancing skeletons, and voices in your head.
Who knew there were so many?
So many others, yes.
So many. So, Sarah, I think, can we open this up now and ask people if they have any questions they'd like to ask or comments they'd like to make?
Yeah, so there are some things coming through the chat.
Yes, I can see that, yes. So in terms of my favorite Welsh writers, unfortunately, I haven't read many Welsh writers. I intend to read more. But yeah, Dylan Thomas, I would say. But yes, I'm embarrassed about that. Sorry. And in terms of Urdu and Farsi influences, yes, you will see that quite a lot in the novel as well, because that's just part of my consciousness. And I have listed some in acknowledgements at the end as well. Sadas and Manto, there's Ghalib, there's Amjad Islam Amjad. And there's also Ibn Insha, especially his satire that I really like, and classical Persian poets also feature quite a bit in the novel, especially Sadi. Actually, the question is by Sadi as well. Sadi Shirazi is also mentioned quite a bit. There's also Maulana Rumi. And also Farruhi and Khaqani and some other Amir Khusro, especially Amir Khusro, because I have named the narrator Khusro after him as well. So yes, these are some of the influences that appear in the novel.
Amanda Nichols asks, "What are you currently reading?"
I was reading a novel by a book of short stories by Roberto Bolaño, which I finished just recently, and didn't particularly like because I was expecting him, being from Argentina, to be following the steps of Borges and Cortázar, which he doesn't. Annoyingly, it's very sort of to the point and. Definitely, admittedly, poetic, but I didn't get as much from it as I was expecting. In other books, I'm reading a book of short stories by Iranian writers in Persian. Yes, that's some of the things that I'm reading at the moment.
So Claire Dudman, who's also a novelist, asks. It's already gone off the screen. She asks which language you prefer to write in. And I think we could supplement that and ask which language you prefer to read in as well.
So growing up, I mostly read in Urdu. and I started reading in English and other languages much later in my teens, I would say. Serious works, and I started reading. I've read course books, of course. They were all in English, annoyingly. But in terms of writing, I like English because of its universality, if I could say. Like it could reach a lot more readers and audience than most of the languages. I would like to write in Urdu, definitely. In some other languages that are very close to me, I would one day definitely like to write in them. Saraiki and Persian, though I write a little bit, bits here and there in these languages, but in terms of a bigger piece of fiction, I would definitely love to be able to write in these languages one day. But at the moment, it's English.
Okay, language preference is coming up quite a lot in the questions now. So Abir is asking, which language do you dream in? And Rana is asking whether you think in Urdu and write in English.
Yes. So, I mean, it depends. To answer both of these questions, I would say it depends. When I was in Pakistan, it was almost always in Urdu, because that was the language that I spoke most of the times. But coming here and living in a mostly English-speaking environment, I think I tend to think in English as well. These days, and when you sleep, it's basically just your thoughts coming back to you in your dreams as well. So it's all these languages. It's mostly English or Urdu, but sometimes I'm really fluent in languages in my dreams, which I don't really speak much, which is quite enigmatic.
This idea of thinking in English now, is that a concern to you? In the sense of a loss, perhaps?
Yes, to some extent, I could say that. I mean, in some ways, it's a gain as well. But yes, it's a loss in a way that I don't get to speak my languages as much as I did at one point. Although I'm trying to teach my children Urdu and some other languages that I speak or I spoke when I was growing up. And Wales and Cardiff being a multicultural and multilingual society is definitely helpful in that way, because my son goes to a Welsh speaking school, and so he's aware of another language, or thinking in another language, speaking another language, so it's not completely outlandish to him.
Right, it's interesting area, isn't it? I think for a lot of people. Excuse me. So Amanda is asking, can you recommend other novels available in the UK set in the same geographical regions as yours, which also deal with important things?
I recently read a very remarkable work by Muhammad Hanif, another Pakistani writer who writes in English, and he's also a journalist, and also employs magical realism. And the book was called Case of Exploding Mangoes, and it's about the assassination of a former military dictator, which actually took place. But the novel is really interesting in the way it deals with that. So Muhammad Hanif, and there's a lot of work in Urdu and Persian in terms of contemporary writing, which hasn't been translated, unfortunately. In terms of Urdu, for example, I don't know how much of Manto, for example, is available or known. Saad Hasan Manto is a great Urdu writer, one of my influences, and he has also talked about social issues with a bit of satire, although his medium is mostly short story. But although I think he's been translated, he's not as well known outside the Indian subcontinent. So I would definitely suggest something by Saad Hasan Manto, especially his Black Margins, a short book with sketches about about the partition of India. It's amazing.
Okay, so I mean, on that language subject, I mean, it does the idea of translation, of translating other writers' work appeal, or are you more concerned to write your own work?
Yes, definitely. I've been translating in a sort of informal way on my social media accounts. I've tried to do that for various languages that I speak: Saraiki, Urdu, Persian, Punjabi, Turkish. But I would love to be able to do something on a sort of larger scale, and maybe starting with some short stories, which is a great medium used in both contemporary Iranian literature and Pakistani literature. I would love to be able to do that.
Right. Because you mentioned all those languages, I as a monoglot English speaker, I was thinking, I was asking the question, would you translate them into English?
yes, I would, I would like to be able to bring those works to the English-speaking audience or the global audience in the way.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Have we got any more questions? Have I missed any questions? Everyone's really excited to read the book, which is great news. We look forward to them reading it, and if they want to comment on it on any of the websites they buy it from, then that would be great as well.
Yes, please. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Another one comes from Claire.
Yes. Have you been able to bring the world of finance? Not much. I've mentioned Delaware and offshore islands, which are usually used by some political people to hide their money. Delaware is an interesting American state where you can register any company. Not many people know about that, but I came to know about that from my work. So yeah, there is a little bit about from that finance world, but not much, because I like to keep my work and leisure or pleasure separately. Manto. Yes, Khalid Hassan has translated Manto, but I haven't read him in translation again. But yeah, definitely, I would recommend his translations. Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions.
No, I think that's everything.
Yeah. Okay, well, perhaps we should then draw things to a close and say thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone,
for coming along. And thank you in particular to Hammad for his lovely novel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
He's going to have a great readership and a great future in front of it. Thanks again, everyone, for coming, and we hope to see you again soon.